another episode of Church is Stupid.
Comma, but
That's right, I wasn't sure if you were going to be ready with it, so thank you for having that.
I am sort of prepared.
Sort of prepared?
Only a little.
You know what? I will take it, though. Today is definitely going to be a unique episode because poor Andy is homesick today. Aww. No?
I miss him.
It's true. And so thank you, a big shout out to Christopher, who came in and helped us actually make the technology work, and Andy for letting us call him even though he's sick, and still helping us with technology.
Yeah.
But we are here, and here today we have myself, Ruth.
And myself, Elijah.
And it's just the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yay! I hope you're not sick of talking to me. No?
No.
I was very confused. So this week, we're going to be talking about the friendly church, quote unquote.
Quote unquote around friendly, right?
Yes, around friendly.
Yes.
Not just random quotes at the end of it. But this topic was something that came up a lot in the research that I was doing about why people don't want to come to church. And one of the reasons that was, or this reason particularly was listed, and it was the idea that people feel like when they come into a church, they have no name. They're essentially just like a number, or they're just a statistic, or whatever. And so I wanted to take a minute and just kind of talk about what exactly that means. Like, Elijah, did you go to a particularly friendly church when you were younger?
I felt like I did. As I've said probably a million times on almost every episode of this podcast, I grew up in a charismatic, more non-denominational church that was really, at least by the time that I was a teenager, it was very, very youth focused. So because a lot of it directly, appealed to me. I mean, I felt like it was very friendly, and I made amazing friends there, and I always felt pretty welcomed.
That's good.
Yeah, I also grew up in it, so I wasn't coming into it with like fresh,
Like
without knowing
outside,
what to expect. So I'm not sure that's the best example that you can pull, but from my experience, it felt very friendly to me.
That's fair. And I think I've been to so many churches. Again, I've moved many, many times. I've been to multiple different denominations. And there's one common theme amongst churches, and that's that they all think that they're friendly. Every single church I have ever gone to believes that it's friendly.
Yeah.
And not all of them really were. And it's interesting that this is kind of something that really keeps people away, because I guess it makes sense if you think of what church is supposed to be, which is a community of believers. The idea that you would walk into a space and not be welcomed makes total sense why you wouldn't want to be a part of that, right?
Right, yeah. And I think most churches, want to really believe that they're a friendly church. I mean, unless you're talking about some of those fringe examples like, Westboro Baptist, where their entire ideology is built on direct hate sort of a thing towards others, where like you're only a part of this club or in this church if you are as zealous as we are. But aside from those examples, which are real and do exist, most people in churches, of course, want to believe that they're welcoming and accepting. Some of them just don't realize that they might not be.
Well,
or at least might not be the most effective,
I think maybe it comes down to people don't know what it is to be friendly.
Right.
Like, if a new person comes into your church and they start getting really involved and they're really excited about being there, and then they get on leadership and they're so excited to like share their ideas, and then they share their first idea and they're met with, well, we've always done it this way, so no.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
It's not, friendly doesn't necessarily mean that first Sunday you're there to greet them and make sure that you talk to them, but friendly is developing that relationship.
Right, yeah.
It's making sure that that person is totally welcomed into the church body and not just another person who walked in the door. And for me, I have an example from a church I served a while back. one day we had a wonderful young woman come into our church building to visit. And she was probably one of the sweetest people I'd ever met. I had invited her because I had met her somewhere else outside of the church. And she was younger. And so when she walked in the doors, the church I was serving was not a young church. They essentially swarmed her.
Yeah.
And it was like, you could just tell her eyes were huge. She was like, I don't know what to do with all of this. There's so many people. And by the time the church service had ended, I had that person's information photocopied and on my desk with a note saying that they expected me to call her immediately. And I'm like, woo!
Yeah.
That's a little over the top.
And you know, some people who may have been a part of that swarm may have probably did have good intentions because they were genuinely excited to have a young person in their church.
Oh, absolutely.
But that doesn't, you know, without necessarily talking about every individual's, you know, like in heart intention and heart motive behind their actions and if they're really friendly or not. Certain things like that can be really off-putting, you know, to strangers who are looking to maybe become a part of a community like that.
Oh yeah, well, and it's just like when you invite someone into leadership who's only been there for like a week, where you're like, at that point, there's not a relationship that's been developed.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like, why do you want me here?
Right.
You don't know who I am, you don't know what.
Yeah.
And you, I think especially our generation is really, really seeking that friendly, welcoming community.
Yeah.
And you can tell because in the 90s there was a big push, and maybe before that too, for these mega churches, right? For this contemporary service that was really like smoke and fog machines and like light shows and all this, but that was kind of the fad.
Yeah. When you said smoke, I thought you were going to say smoke and
mirrors.
mirrors. Yeah.
No, I don't think that's a whole other story. Yeah. But
I did interrupt your actual specific story though about this young lady who was swarmed at a church. What happened after all of this?
Sorry, 1 second. I'm going to go on my mega church. The shift has come. We're so many tangents past. See, Andy,
I interrupted
Andy,
you
we need you.
trying to talk about,
We need you to keep us focused.
You need a mediator.
We need a mediator. But the movement from the 90s, it's sort of, again, we call it the pendulum. The pendulum is so true. We swing from one extreme to another consistently. And the move towards megachurch started to make a lot of people who were at the megachurches feel like they were just a number. They didn't really have a community. They might have enjoyed church more, but it didn't necessarily impact their daily lives the way they wanted it to. Not true of all megachurches by any means. Not saying that is always true, but it's easier in a crowd to feel like you're just another person. Yeah. And so the movement now has gone back to more family churches and wanting to be in a smaller, even maybe not even a church, but like a small group. Right.
Yeah, sort of like we were talking about a few weeks ago with just the idea of less traditional churches, maybe not even a quote church building sort of a thing. Yeah, it's definitely. I can see what you're saying when you talk about a pendulum sort of thing.
Oh yeah,
between like the decades, yeah.
And so back to the story of the young woman who came. She never came back.
There it is. There's the punchline.
That's she never came back, and it was because she felt so out of place instantly. Like it was so strange for a visitor to be there that. To be swarmed like that was like, okay, what's going on in this place? And I do believe, thankfully, she did find another church home for herself. But like you had mentioned, those people were really, really well intentioned. I really believe that they wanted to do their best to welcome a new person. But unfortunately, it was a little bit overbearing. Yeah. And to me, the shift happens because the focus was more on them than it was on the new person. Right. Instead of thinking, how would this person feel welcome? A lot of churches, instead of doing that, they think, how can we be welcoming? And by shifting it so the focus is on you instead of on the other people, you are inherently no longer being a welcoming church.
Yeah, when the important thing becomes about how great it is that this person, or even this type of person, like a younger person, how great is it that they are now here at our place, instead of necessarily maybe talking to them or treating them in that moment like a stranger, but not making them feel like a stranger. I don't know how else to say it.
Well, and it's almost what can they offer to us instead of what can we offer to them. The mission of Christ is for us to go into the world and to make disciples of all humankind, and it's not the other way around.
Yeah.
How can we get more people to attend our church service, and I think it's really easy to pick up on when a church is really more focused on that.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it, yeah.
And for that particular church, having somebody who was younger meant, oh man, maybe we can start to revive the youth program, and maybe they'll be willing to do this, that, and the other thing, but only the way we want them to. And that's the heartbreaking part.
Right.
And again, you don't want to see these well-intentioned people because it doesn't start that way. I don't think anybody goes into it and thinks, man, I care more about my church than about other people.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of it is conscious, intentioned, thought like that. I don't think that in this example, a lot of the people who were excited about having, a new young person attend their church service, were literally thinking to themselves oh, this will look great for our demographics, or think of all the things that we could volunteer this person for.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I don't think a lot of it is intentioned in that way, but it can sort of, like you said, sometimes it's pretty clear to the person on the other side when a church body will sort of views not even them as a person, but their presence at a service in that way. It can be pretty clear to them when a lot of the people swearing them, they know that they're excited, and I don't think that it's bad to be excited for that reason if I was in their position. But it can be pretty clear when the importance isn't really on having a new person to share their community with is there, and rather when the focus is more on, oh look, we just checked, this person is here to check another box for us.
Yep.
Let's keep them.
Yep.
And I think everyone can admit that that's not the hardest thing to see in a church when they're acting like that.
Oh, 100%. And I also think there's a really big movement. One of the other ways that I've seen this play out is actually through, sorry to call out your roots, hon, but, oh, sorry, Elijah, you have a name. We're not just talking.
Guess, yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Anyhow, look, we do love each other.
Remember, this is being recorded, Ruth.
Oh no! Talking with someone who is very staunchly in the non-denominational movement, does not like denominations. I remember talking about being a United Methodist pastor and just sharing some of my excitement for ministry and what I was doing. And I was met with, wow, we're so surprised that you would ever be a United Methodist pastor.
Yeah.
How could you be a denominational pastor? You actually have passion.
Yeah.
And I was like,
yeah.
whoa. But I think the non-denominational movement, not all of it by any means, but there is this danger of having it become, we're the only church that is friendly and all other churches are not.
We are the only church that is focusing on the really right things. And I know you said sorry to call it your roots, but I mean that's something that I directly saw start to come up in the church culture.
Well, and that's a very, quite frankly, unfriendly thing to do.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I've been blessed to be, I was part of non-denominational growing up as well, and I've been a part of lots of them, and I've seen many, many, many great ones. But I think that sometimes that attitude prevails through it, unintentionally, but it's almost this idea of we're the elite, and I think each denomination does that in its own way as well. It's not strict to non-denominational.
Every denomination, I was gonna say for better or worse, but it's pretty just for worse, honestly. Every denomination in their own way, in some way, has the potential to have their own reasons for looking down on other denominations, and therefore, whether it's intentioned or not, looking down on the individuals in other denominations. Like and I can speak from experience, and you can too, Ruth, about some of the things that we've seen in the non-denominational movement specifically, in the way that they can become. I'm saying they again, like I'm talking about specific people, but there's a certain sort of culture that can be there that makes their idea of absence of tradition, that like tradition isn't holding us back, that becomes the forefront and the more important factor, and makes them feel better than other denominations for maybe having more traditional beliefs or having tradition in general.
Well, and I think like we said, inherently that problem exists within pretty much every denomination, where the idea is that they're significantly better than others, or maybe not significantly, or maybe it's not overtly stated,
right? Yeah.
But it's definitely implied.
It's a culture that kind of just comes up, I think.
Oh yeah, and I think it starts from a place of being happy to be where you came from, and being proud of your roots in a sense.
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
But when you start to conflate that with this is Christianity, and this is the only way Christianity exists. Now, we take this problem and you go outside of the Christian world.
Right.
And you look at anybody who's not a Christian, and we can't even agree with each other. So we can't even be friendly to each other.
Right.
So how are we going to ever look friendly to people who are not Christians? Because, notice I said look friendly, not even be friendly. and it's just, honestly, it looks like one big hypocrisy. And it's one of the reasons that I love ecumenical movements. I love seeing the different denominations coming together and working together and being, ecumenical just means it's a group of churches that are from different denominations. Yeah. Like United Methodist, Presbyterian, non-denominational, whatever they happen to be a part of. And they come together and they do services together, or they do community work together, whatever that group looks like.
That's probably one of the best things that as a church right now in like America that we can do to help build bridges between each other again. Because unfortunately, whether as Christians we want to admit it or not, like there are gaps and chasms between different denominations, and maybe not even the people involved. I don't think that everyone involved in one denomination, always feels like they're part of a warring tribe with another by any means. But it's pretty clear to see that there's some, I think there's a point where it can go beyond just differences of opinion, and it goes to differences in whether you think people in that denomination are valid or not. Yeah. Yeah, and ecumenical groups, like, because I remember you talking about it at one of our other appointments where you were involved. Your church was involved in an ecumenical group with different churches of different denominations in the community. And me growing up non-denominational in a church where, as far as I was aware, granted I was younger, so I may not have paid attention, but I don't think that we were involved in something like that specifically with a lot of other denominations. I thought it was amazing. The idea of it was like some new crazy thing to me. And I still, you bringing it up again, like sparked it in me again. And you can tell that idea is exciting to me.
Oh, absolutely. I like I said, I adore the ecumenical movement because I think it's a step in the right direction. Yeah. We can't, as I was saying in regards to just general friendliness, people pick up on that. They know that our denominations are not being kind to each other. And if we're not kind to each other, then how on earth are we ever going to be kind to anybody else? And that's just on a more macro scale. On a micro scale, how many different topics have we talked about on this podcast so far that show just the lack of friendliness, like shame culture, like all sorts of different things like that, where it's like you walk into a church building and you sit down and people are staring at you because your shorts a little bit too, or your skirt's a little too short, or whatever the issue is, or they gossip. The time that Andy shared about his friend who went to church and shared something very deep and personal, and by the next week everybody knew what was going on, and that's not friendly.
Yeah.
And a lot of times churches do it under this guise of accountability. And that drives me insane. Like, oh, it's my job to make sure that everyone who walks into this church building is held accountable. And it's not. And that's where I think churches really don't know how to balance that accountability with grace and with kindness and mercy.
Yeah.
Because if we expect everybody to walk into our church buildings perfect, we are ridiculous.
Right.
Nobody inside of the church building is perfect. Like,
yeah, it's kind of like a lot of churches expect you, as silly as this might sound coming out of my mouth, I don't think that churches should expect everyone who walks in their church building to be Christian. And beyond, even beyond that, because being the phrase being Christian can mean a million different things to a million different people. You shouldn't expect someone to walk into your church, you know, if they do walk into your church, you shouldn't just expect them to be the type of Christian that you think that they should be.
Well, and that's a whole other thing.
Right.
Maybe people will be friendly to you as long as you're exactly what they expect.
Right, yeah.
Like,
and it's pretty crystal clear when you're being treated that way. You know, it's not hard to tell.
What I think one of my other favorite examples of churches and friendliness always comes back to the Sunday morning restaurant rush. How many people go to church on Sunday and then afterwards go out to eat at a local restaurant and treat people like crap?
Yep.
And don't tip. Don't do those things. Like, and the thing is, people notice. They notice. They know you're a church group. And when you're being obnoxious, they know where you're from.
Right.
And people just don't, it's like this whole premise of Sunday morning face. Like, oh, I'm a Christian on Sunday mornings. But when I go throughout the rest of the week, I can be a jerk whenever I want.
Or the rest of the day sometimes.
The rest of the day.
Once church service is over, I'm going.
Well, and it breaks my heart. I don't know how many times I've seen, like, you know, those Facebook stories that get shared around of waitresses who are like, oh, look, another Christian group came in and the tip says $0. Our tip is that you love Jesus. It's like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Like, even when it came to taxes, Jesus said, like, give to Caesar what is Caesar and give to God what is God's. Like, tip your waitresses, for Pete's sake.
Yeah.
It's just common decency. Like, I feel like so many times churches think if we just put ushers in the back to greet people, if we just, like, say hi, then we have achieved friendly.
Right.
Or because they're nice to each other, they assume that they're nice to everybody else who walks in.
Yeah.
And, like, gossip is so prevalent in churches, and gossip is not friendly. Believe it or not.
Yeah, and it feels weird almost talking about this because I know we're talking about the idea of friendly church and you know, and being nice and being friendly. When I sometimes it's not even just about learning to be nice to people because it sounds like such an elementary thing. I think it's just clear when someone isn't truly welcome and accepted like the church claims they should be. And you know, and because regardless, you know, there's a lot of people who aren't Christians who have, you know, who have a certain view of the church because of, you know, the way the church has been throughout history. But I think that most people, or I would hope that most people at least know at the very, very, very least what the church claims it wants to be and what the church claims it should be, you know, in terms of Jesus and the gospel and loving your neighbor as yourself and being kind to one another and that sort of idea. So I feel like with that knowledge, you know, and even added on top of the knowledge of the way that some churches actually in reality do treat people, it's just plain as day when it's plain as day to anybody who walks into a church hoping that they'll be able to just be accepted by a random group of people for who they are, like, you know, people because they're attending, because they're strangers, and it's just clear when they're not welcomed in the way that churches claim they are. You know, it's clear when there's strings attached. It's clear when someone walks up to them who tries to talk to them about something, you know, when a churchgoer basically makes conversation with them that's very pointed, that has, you know, that has a certain intention behind it, behind figuring out what kind of Christian they are or what kind of person they are. Instead of just relating to, you know, you're relating to people like you want to build a relationship with a stranger. I don't know. It's a lot of churches say that they do that kind of thing, but then just don't really show that sort of community, you know.
Yeah, and they don't follow through on it.
Follow through is a big one.
So,
a big part of it.
As we're winding up this episode, what does a truly friendly church look like to you? What kind of a church community would you want to be a part of?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I know you're asking me, or are you just posing it to the audience?
I mean, I'm asking you
Oh,
specifically.
okay. I thought you were posing it for the audience.
To the audience. I'd love to hear all of your answers.
That's funny. I thought you were posing it to the audience, and I'm like,
I'm
how do I add it onto that question for other people? But it's for me. I don't know. I feel if I'm just gonna go to like my gut feeling about, you know, what would a friendly experience be in a church? What would a friendly church look like? It would, if I'm being honest, for me personally, I feel like if I were attending a service that I had never gone to before with a bunch of people that I didn't know, what would make me feel truly welcomed would be if I was just approached and talked to like a normal person at like a cafe or something, where I wasn't necessarily, you know, asked immediately about my faith. If someone was talking to me because they were just a friendly person who wanted to it's going to sound so redundant. A person who just like maybe wanted to make a new friend. As simple as that sounds. Because it's clear when people don't necessarily want to be friends with you, but when people want to see if you are worthy of being in their church.
Yeah.
So what would really make me feel like I was part of a friendly church, I guess, would just be if I was just talked to, if I had the same conversations with those people that I would have in a non-church setting. And through fostering that relationship with people, you know, through maybe attending again and building real relationships and having more conversations where I felt like I could trust those people, then talking about more personal things like my faith and maybe things that I'm going through. But that only happens through building a genuine relationship with anybody.
Oh, absolutely.
You know.
And I think my answer is much the same. To me, a friendly church is a place that embraces you, but treats it as a process and a journey, and also acknowledges that not every single person inside the building has to be your best friend, or has to be the person who agrees with you the most, or anything like that. That celebrates differences and is willing to put the effort into intentionally making sure that their people are taken care of.
Yeah.
So for me, walking in as a complete stranger, if I walk into a church and I'm looking around, you know, whatever, I'm a pretty not an extrovert. I know that I get confused for one a lot because in my professional life, you kind of have to be sort of more extroverted. But in my personal life, I'm a very private person who likes to, you know, kind of chill and sneak in. So for me, it'd be finding someone who is willing to approach me just really nonchalantly, no pressure, just like, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. And if we connected, we talk. If not, we don't. Yeah. And it's not a big deal. But then, as you grow in relationship, consciously invites you to do other things.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
it's building a relationship outside of a worship service for me. It's knowing somebody well enough to know when their mom is sick or all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a real friendly community church looks like.
Yeah.
And that any new person who walks in could find somebody to connect with.
Yeah, yeah. I know that we're at the end of this
Yes.
episode, but I do think that I found like a better way of saying it really quick, you know.
Go for it.
There are a lot of things in your life, and whether a church will tell you that it should be or shouldn't be, your faith, your beliefs, it's a very personal thing.
Yes.
It's not something that most people just share with anyone they meet. And if they do, a lot of people think that they're like annoying and trying to force their beliefs on you. Whether they are or aren't, that's just how it's viewed. And I think that a church that's really welcoming and really friendly, a community of people who are really like that, make it clear that they don't expect you to suddenly share all of your personal, your personal life and your personal beliefs and stuff with them immediately. Because I don't think that you showing up to a church service means that your personal things become their need to know. And a lot of people
That's a good way to
sort of, a lot of people in church just seem to think that because you're there, that your personal life is all their business.
Oh.
And a lot of times, and I know this is a whole other conversation that we could dive into, and I know that I'm kicking a hornet's nest almost right as we're ending the episode, but a lot, you only share personal issues with people for the sake of only communicating, or building a relationship after you've grown to trust people. It's not something that that most people feel comfortable with sharing with strangers, especially when you really feel that those strangers have agendas, and you really feel that those strangers expect certain things of you, and yeah. I think that a really friendly church is a church that acknowledges that personal things can be personal things, and that to truly spread the gospel to people and to minister to people and to help change, to help build a community of people who want the gospel to be spread, that happens through being genuine with each other and just building real relationship. And those relationships don't just happen on day one by forcing personal issues out of people, So that was just something that I kind of thought of.
I thought that was a great add-on. I'm more than happy to go overtime for it.
And he's not here to yell at us.
I know, we have
Which he should be. He's the one that keeps us in check.
45 minutes later, we're still talking.
Yeah.
Thank you, and tune in on Thursday, because we're going to be talking a little bit more about the no-name church, and what that exactly looks like, and what it feels like to just be kind of lost in a crowd. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. I almost called you Andy after we were just talking.
It's weird,
about
isn't it? I know.
Just a reminder, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or if you want to listen to our awesome podcast, which you're already listening to, so I don't know why I always add this, but it's fine. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, YouTube, Spotify, and more. So
Probably.
From all of us here at Church is Stupid,
Comma butt.
I'm Ruth.
And I'm Elijah. I was waiting for Andy again.
And we hope you have a great week.
See you guys.